I'm really pleased to moderate this panel today. And as you said, such a timely topic around the firm system of quality control. Effective quality management systems are crucial for consistent performance of high quality audits. I really do look forward to hearing from our panelists today about both the firm's current systems of quality control as well as their views on the standard setting project. So let me share with you a little bit about who's joining us today. We've got Brian Croteau from PwC, Jim Dolanor from Crow LLP, Richard Rogers from EY, and Megan Ziesen from the PCAOB. Before we get started, Megan, I believe you want to share your disclaimer, and then we're going to be watching a short video that will set the stage for our discussion. So Megan?
So I have to just give my disclaimers. So the views you will hear today are my own, not those of the board, individual board members, or any members of its staff. Thank you.
How do auditors control for quality? Just as companies need to have quality controls to run their businesses, so do auditors. This isn't a new concept, but as would be expected, the old standard around a firm's system of quality control is quite short and definitely could be classified as principles-based to the extreme. And just as auditors can take control reliance to reduce the extent of their substantive audit work, so too, the PCAOB has argued, can they? If they do extensive work on a firm's system of quality control, they can reduce the number of on-site inspections, perhaps more than halving the number of individual inspections they have historically undertaken.
Firms and regulators alike agree that effective quality control systems are crucial to supporting consistently high-quality audits. To that point, firms' quality control systems have evolved since the current QC standards were put in effect, and firms find themselves needing to continuously evolve in response to changing technological, demographic, social, and economic environments. Not surprisingly, there is increasing interest in creating more specificity around firms' quality control systems in light of these developments, both in the US through the PCAOB and the rest of the world through the IAASB.
So what is quality? The overt indicators of poor quality over the past 10 years have been oriented toward unique events that have already occurred. These include restatements of previously issued financial statements, incorrect conclusions in ICFR reports, and negative internal and external inspection findings. Measures such as abnormal accruals and earnings management do not, from a practice perspective, come into play because they reflect on financial statements and management positions, not at least from my perspective on the quality and effectiveness of an audit. They are, again, more than anything, a risk assessment tool that might be used by an auditor in planning an audit. Now, there's also been some effort to highlight what would be considered best practices, or if you will, good quality. These have generally emanated from external inspections, and the PCAOB has cataloged these in a number of public communications.
But again, these indicators, restatements, incorrect ICFR reports, or internal or external inspection findings, are point-in-time end results, the outcome of detective controls. They don't provide information about what went wrong, or conversely, what went right. In reflecting on how to more proactively manage quality at the firm level and improve audit quality, some firms have significantly increased their focus on governance and leadership, incentive systems and accountability, and monitoring and remediation. This is done using principles from COSO and other internal control and ERM frameworks. This drives a more proactive, risk-based approach to anticipating and responding to quality risks, taking into account the firm's size and complexity, the legal and regulatory environment in which it operates, and importantly, the types of companies it audits. An important part of this is a feedback loop from monitoring activities, including a robust root cause analysis of findings to support continuous improvements in quality control systems. The PCAOB and the IAASB and the research and standards have drawn attention to those best practices, noting that ongoing monitoring procedures can help firms prevent or timely detect quality control problems before they result in deficient engagements.
Okay, and this is Brian Croto. I think maybe I'll pick up. I think we've lost Lara for a moment, just again, given the tropical storm. So just picking up on the first question for the panel, and that's that there is information that addresses audit quality issues and firm quality control processes that is publicly available. And academics use and research this data, but they only tell part of the story. And so for me, the question is, could I give an overview of these data sources and some of their strengths and shortcomings? And so first, I'll just say that I'm delighted to be here. And like Megan, I hope that we all don't have continued difficulties with the tropical storm. So just maybe I'll just start by saying that, as was alluded to in the video, I think it's really important to start with how one defines audit quality. And, to understand at least how firms think about audit quality, one place one could look is in firms' audit quality reports, including, for instance, PwC's audit quality report. We last published ours last September in terms of the full report, and we issued an update to that in February, and we produce that report at least annually. And in our report, at least, we describe audit quality as one where we consistently comply with the auditing standards, including exercising professional skepticism. We apply a deep understanding, broad understanding of our clients' business and the financial environment in which they operate. And we use our experience to identify and resolve issues timely. In the audit quality report that we produce, and I know other firms have similar reports, there's no single metric or measure for quality, if you will, but we do produce a number of what we call transparency data points. And those include inputs and output measures and qualitative considerations. Some of the input measures include things like training and use of technology, or the extent of involvement of specialists or resources in our national office. And then there are output data measures, including our internal inspections, external inspections, restatements of ICFR or financial statement reports. But in addition to that, the audit quality reports, including ours, does provide an overview of our system of quality control, including changes that we make on a periodic basis as there are changes in the practice environment in which we operate, as well as to address potential defects in the system of quality control over time and make continued enhancements. And so that's certainly a place to look to understand at least how firms think about audit quality. In terms of other sets of data and external data that one looks to, we do know that there's a lot of focus and attention on both internal inspection programs, but also external inspections that are conducted by the PCAOB. And certainly a strength of the data point of external inspections is the objectivity that the regulator brings to bear relative to their views and perspectives on audit quality. Of course, when you look at inspections by a regulator, at least from a PCAOB perspective, many of those are risk-based. And as the PCAOB themselves warns or cautions, you shouldn't necessarily extrapolate those results to the entire population, either within a firm or across the profession, but nonetheless, an important data point. The PCAOB recently, as many of you probably know, did enhance their reporting. They revamped and enhanced their reporting, starting with their 2018 reports of 2017 audits that were issued back in June. And again, I think the data in these reports is useful in many respects. I think the reports are significantly improved and enhanced in their new format in terms of being more accessible, readable, and easier to understand. And so I think the reports are useful from the perspective of they can inform other firms and others within the profession the kinds of issues the PCAOB is identifying in the inspections process. They certainly can inform management and audit committees relative to questions they may ask or areas of focus that they may want to have relative to areas the PCAOB has identified as inspection observations. And then, of course, could be used by the academic community relative to research that can inform then a range of outcomes, including public policy. The PCAOB did redesign, as I mentioned, their reports, and many of you have probably seen there's a new section, Part 1A and Part 1B of the public reports. The first section, Part 1A, really includes what were the old, similar to the old Part 1 deficiencies that are those for which the PCAOB's view is the firm did not obtain sufficient evidence to support their opinion. The new section, Part 1B, contains other deficiencies that, although not going to whether or not the firm could support their opinion on ICFR or the financial statements, nonetheless may implicate compliance with other aspects of PCAOB standards. So those could be things like compliance with the requirements of Form AP or audit committee communication requirements, and issues of that nature, independence matters and the like. Part 2, or the non-public portion of PCAOB inspection reports, continues to contain, to the extent applicable, quality control criticisms or defects that the PCAOB identifies, and those are only made public still if a firm doesn't satisfactorily address those towards remediating or remediate them within a 1-year window after the report's issued. So certainly there's data there that one can look to. And then the last area I'll mention, because it certainly gets a lot of attention, certainly would be SEC or PCAOB enforcement matters. So from an SEC perspective, the accounting and auditing enforcement releases, or AAERs. Here, again, a degree of caution relative to a data point, understanding the nature of any conduct that's described in those, the corrective actions that might have been taken by a firm since that action, since that conduct had occurred, is important to consider. The pervasiveness of the issue relative to the firm is important to consider. And obviously, these are a small population relative to the total number of firms and audits that are conducted in any period of time. So trends can be very difficult to take away from that data point as well. But all of this is information that I think is something that can be used as an input to think about and research and have perspectives relative to audit quality. I do believe that over the last years, there have been significant improvements in audit quality across the profession. I think we have lots of evidence of that. We've come a long way over the decades since the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And in addition to that, I would say that we're always operating in a ever-changing environment, and that requires not only dealing with issues from the past, but preventing new issues from emerging currently. And I'm sure we'll have more time to talk about that today, so it requires vigilance. But maybe that's just a little perspective relative to some of the data points that might be out there relative to thinking about quality. So, Lara, I think maybe you've returned. Yes?
Yep. I'm back. I'm hopefully getting back in the right way. But let me say, maybe I'll pass this over to Richard first. We talk about audit quality reports that some of the firms publish, and they describe, the firm's governance, leadership, processes, and procedures. Can you share what your firm's report provides and how has it evolved over time? We'll start with you, Richard.
Yeah, Lara, glad to take that one, and great to be with everyone today. So specifically on EY's quality report, we have been issuing our quality report since 2012. And in the U.S., I would like to just point out for the group that these quality reports that I'm referring to, Brian referred to PwC's quality reports. These are voluntary reports that the firms produce, again with a goal or the intention to bring some transparency to the audit practices of the firms, focusing on governance, focusing on how audits are conducted, and how we measure that, including both qualitative as well as quantitative measures. So EY's last report, we issued it in November, and it included metrics on some 57 different quantitative measures that we have tracked and believe are relevant in terms of evaluating audit quality. Interestingly enough, though, 11 of those metrics were new for 2019. And I think that demonstrates kind of the evolving nature that we see in these quality reports, and the fact that over a period of time, that those metrics that we see to be most important can evolve. So, for instance, in our most recent quality report, the new metrics pertain to our audit team's use of some of our digital audit tools, provided more trending information, and then also provided some additional information around how we're pacing audits during the course of the year to mitigate the impact of the what we traditionally refer to as the busy season crunch at year end. So a number of metrics there that again currently firms select and provide on a voluntary basis based on best views of what is relevant in terms of audit quality.
Okay, great. Maybe let's move over to you, Megan. You were the IAASB Vice Chair at the time that we were working to update firm quality control standards. And I understand you are quite involved in the project. Maybe you could provide the impetus for the exposure draft and what the PCAOB board's approach is to revising QC standards.
Sure, thanks, Lara. I'd be happy to do that, and just would say thanks for the opportunity to participate in today's panel discussion. So very happy to talk a little bit about the history of the IAASB's project and then provide some background to the PCAOB's project. So on the IAASB side, things started back with the IAASB's post-implementation survey of its clarified standards, which included ISQC1, as well as the IAASB's input from its outreach activities, which included fairly extensive outreach to regulators and to audit oversight bodies, the academic community and others. So that survey and the results of ongoing outreach highlighted some of the challenges with respect to the current standard and raised questions about the need for modernization. So it was pointed out that really over the last decade, which was, so the ISQC1 was really put in place in the early 2000s. There'd been some significant changes in the environment in which the standard was operating. So these included things like users of auditors' reports on financial statements and other engagement reports, really really placing greater importance on and having increasingly higher expectations for firms as it relates to their systems of quality control, which are the systems that support the performance of those engagements. And then audit regulators and audit inspection bodies globally were also being seen to place more importance on quality control and on firm systems. And then you also had the backdrop of critical audit inspection findings really just generally increasing. And it was also noted that deficiencies in some matters kind of seemed to persist over time without timely or adequate resolution, all of which kind of raised questions about the systems of quality control that supported those engagements. And then it was also noted that firms' practices were evolving both at the engagement level as well as at the system of QC level in terms of technological developments, globalization of business practices, as well as in response, obviously, to regulation and audit oversight, which when the ISQC1 was first drafted, were really just in their really infancy stages. So the IAASB commenced its work back in 2014, 2015, issued an invitation to comment to get some stakeholder input on the proposed approach, and in 2016 approved a project proposal to go forward. So the objectives of that project proposal were really around enhancing the robustness of the requirements for a system of quality control, introducing a more proactive and risk-based approach, which they recognized would be something that would be more capable of being tailored and adapted by firms of different sizes and different complexity and firms who did different types of things. They also wanted to increase the focus on firm leadership responsibilities and accountability and focus on firm governance. And then a very important aspect of it was to enhance the requirements around monitoring and remediation. And I know we'll talk about that, I'm sure, later on in this panel, and really focus on monitoring and that remediation aspect where the current standard really didn't have a lot to in that area. And then, like I mentioned, just really recognizing modernization as it related to technology and really evolving use of networks and other service providers, and then scalability being a big theme that they were trying to address as well. So they've progressed that work, and they're on track to approve the new standard as a final standard at the September 2020 meeting, so basically next month. So it's been a fairly long road, but they're getting to the end of that. So maybe turning to the PCAOB. So quality control has been and continues to be a priority focus for the PCAOB, and work was really underway to consider changes to the PCAOB's QC standards long before I joined the PCAOB at the beginning of last year. So the impetus for a PCAOB QC standard setting project, essentially very similar to the IAASB's. A lot has happened since the PCAOB's current QC standards were drafted, which were really the ones that were developed by the AICPA and then adopted by the PCAOB on an interim basis. So really standards that were written before the PCAOB PCAOB was even established. So similar to the findings from the from the IAASB's research, we saw significant changes in the auditing environment, expanded and evolving use of technology, not only at the engagement level, but also in the context of the firm system of QC, and then really looking at firms making increased use of resources from networks, from service providers, and increasing their focus on governance and leadership and the monitoring and remediation practices. So, it was acknowledged that the current PCAOB standards didn't really reflect all of those. So last year, the board made the decision to move QC to the standard setting agenda, and then we the board issued a concept release towards the end of the year in December, soliciting comment on a potential approach or way forward. So that kind of was really seeking input on how to approach a potential PCAOB standard, explored the idea of using the risk-based kind of proactive type of approach, and then mentioned that the PCAOB was considering using the IAASB's draft as a starting point, with modifications obviously as appropriate for engagements by firms being done under the PCAOB standards. So given the foundational nature of a firm's QC system, we recognized and believe that it really wouldn't be practical to require firms to comply with fundamentally different QC standards. But we also believe that, unnecessary differences in QC systems could lead to confusion, complexity, and ultimately actually could detract from audit quality. So that was an important thing to get some input on. And we also pointed out that, while we would seek to avoid unnecessary differences, we do anticipate that there would be a need for some incremental or some alternative requirements that would be fit for purpose in our environment. So I think we have to recognize as well that the IAASB is developing a standard that would be applied by all firms that use ISQC 1 or its updated version, and the ICES, and that covers firms that do all kinds of audits, but also firms that might not even do audits, but only do other kinds of assurance engagements or other services under the IAASB standards. And clearly in the PCAOB world, we're dealing with firms that do audits of issuers and registered broker-dealers. So we pointed out that there could be different reasons for us to have some different requirements or incremental requirements. So those could be things like things that might need to align with the US federal securities laws, the SEC rules, other PCAOB standards and rules. We also have some important topics in our current standards that maybe are not dealt with as directly or maybe not at all in ISQC 1, and we would look at carrying those over, obviously subject to input as well. And then, I think there just are some places where I think we would want to provide a little bit more of a definitive direction as to what we were expecting firms to do to really have put in place systems that would be fit for purpose in our environment. So we received 36 comment letters on the concept release from a pretty broad range of stakeholders, so we were happy with that. I would say in general, commenters were supportive of the approach to the future PCAOB standard, on board with the approach of starting with the IAASB's risk-based approach. And what I should say is that there was a lot of support for the risk-based proactive kind of approach to QC. And then, some commentary around the idea of incremental and alternative requirements, where I think commenters kind of maybe some of them understood the need for that, but we were also cautioned against being overly prescriptive and adding too many additional requirements. So that was one of the themes that we heard. So we're carefully analyzing the comments that we have received and developing the next steps. I think I should also point out that, we continue to monitor, obviously, the IAASB's progress, and really right from the beginning, there has been a PCAOB observer that has participated with the IAASB's ISQM1 task force. So that's been a good opportunity to really learn from the IAASB's thinking there as well. And then maybe the last point I'll touch on, and maybe this is a burning question for people, or maybe the people who've read our concept release would already know the answer. People would ask if the IAASB seems to be moving to the term quality management. Would the PCAOB do the same, or would the PCAOB continue to use quality control? So we did point out in our concept release that the PCAOB's plans are to continue to use system of quality control, and that's really because it remains to be then consistent with the requirements of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. But we did point out in the concept release that firms could really use different terms to describe something that would comply with the requirements of whatever a final standard would look like. And I also think regardless of the term used, really what's important is that both boards are focused on proactive and risk-based management of engagement quality by firms, and particularly on an approach that would be adaptable to the nature and circumstances of a firm and the nature of the engagements that it performs. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Megan?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. They're not sure if we have technical difficulties or not. I have to apologize to all of you. I'm clearly on the East Coast in the middle of this tropical storm, so Megan is as well, and apparently she has a better provider than I do. Let's try to move things along. There's a couple questions here for you, Jim, around the quality control standards, around is there a one size fits all? And then what are the challenges for firms that are of a varying size? Not all the firms are quite as sophisticated or up the curve. So maybe share some thoughts globally around a one size fits all, and how do firms of different sizes deal and think about the quality standard?
Sure. Thanks, Lara. And thank you to the CAQ. I'm happy to be here on today's panel. So, maybe let me speak to whether one size fits all here, and maybe this falls under the broad topic of scalability. And I think it's very important that a QC standard be written of a nature such that it can be applied, by firms of all sizes. The complexity of a firm's processes and their methodologies, needs to be flexible to accommodate the various structures and approaches, firms of different sizes have, and it's clear firms are different in how they have their processes and methodologies. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong because they're different. It just means they are different. And I look at another key point to looking at size is amongst network firms themselves. And, the size of the firms from firm to firm across jurisdiction varies significantly. So even for a large network firm, you need to have flexibility and scalability so that all of your member firms can be in a position to comply with a standard. And by way of example, I look at, to kind of put this in some perspective, an aspect of a QC standard is client acceptance. A large firm may have multiple levels of review, right? Where depending on the risk criteria, the profile, a public interest entity, you may need 2, 3, or 4 individuals to approve a new client versus a very small client where, say, the CEO or managing partner, they approve every single audit client. And that may very well be just as effective as a large firm's process. And so again, I think it's very important that the standard address scalability and flexibility as it relates to QC processes. And maybe just kind of turning to your second point, Lara, on maybe challenges that firms see with oversight of clients, of varying size and sophistication. Just like firms that have varying sizes, our clients do as well, and their level of sophistication, even for some large clients, could be very different than others. And so I think a principles-based approach versus prescriptive requirements will allow for better scalability and oversight by firms as they look to make sure quality is where it needs to be in their audit practice. And I would say, in terms of one of the biggest challenges we see is on timing. And recognize that oversight covers a lot of different topics. It's a broad term, right? It could be engagement oversight. It could be oversight from the EQR, as well as oversight from a firm process. And as I look at oversight, and I'll be careful not to generalize here, but oftentimes you'll see smaller entities, issuers, it's more challenging there to provide that level of oversight. And when you look at the nature of the client, right? The large accelerated filers. And again, I'm generalizing, but oftentimes they've got the resources to help them close their books, prepare their financial statements, that allow the auditors to be able to get in there and get their procedures done, and allow the firms to perform their various levels of oversight. As you look at smaller entities, oftentimes the issuers are using every day they have up to their filing to get their books closed, get their filings done. And obviously that puts challenges on audit firms to really make sure all their oversight is being accomplished. And I would say clearly from the profession's perspective, we have looked at the workload compression in, very small periods of time for many, many years. And I would say it's one of the things that we continue to look at, and we continue to look at ways that we can manage that. And one of the things that I think from a monitoring perspective that is particularly challenged by this compression is, as I mentioned, you've got the engagement team oversight, EQR, and then firm level oversight. And many firms, including ours, have gone to what I would call real-time monitoring for a number of years now. And we have found real-time monitoring to be very beneficial and desirable, because if you find anything, you're able to get it addressed before the report ever goes out the door. And so we do find it very desirable. But when you throw in a time compression, challenging situations, that's one of the more challenging areas for auditors to fit that in, even though we recognize the huge benefits of having real-time monitoring. That said, I believe, firms continue to innovate, continue to be creative in achieving other quality measures and tools that'll help us. We're looking at automation, artificial intelligence, data mining. These are all areas that allow us to do a broader brush in terms of looking at quality on a real-time basis. So those are some initial reactions to your questions, Lara.
Thanks, Jim. Brian, let's turn to you. I think Jim covered some of this, but from your perspective, given your role at PwC, what are the fundamental objectives, just baseline around what a firm system of quality management should be? And clearly it goes beyond the current standard. Can you provide some thoughts relative to what you're seeing?
Yeah, sure, Lara. So as our regulatory risk and quality control leader, I do spend a lot of time thinking about our system of quality control, which we do build it around. It's built around a quality management framework, which is actually a relatively new framework that each of our network firms, including us as a U.S. firm, complies with as part of our network responsibilities. But importantly, the overall objective, which I'm sure cuts across all firms, is to maintain a system that provides reasonable assurance that audits are conducted in accordance with the standards as a baseline. But it's complex and it's not static, and we're operating in a continuously changing environment, and so we're constantly adapting to that change, getting ahead of change, getting ahead of new and emerging risks. And we're also complying with a full set of multiple standards. So we've got PCAOB standards, IAASB standards, that we're complying with AICPA standards. We also map our own framework to other frameworks such as COSO, as we kind of think about our system of quality controls. Importantly, as you think about the components of a system of quality control, and every firm may categorize some of this differently or the like, but at the fundamentals, it addresses a very broad range of activities, all the way from right up front acceptance and continuance of new engagements, auditor independence, engagement aspects of engagement performance, training, assignments of responsibilities for both partners and staff, network participation of other firms that are involved or other firms outside of the firm's network that might be involved in conducting the audit, how we monitor, which Jim talked a little bit about both from a pre-issuance perspective and post-issuance perspective. And all of these pieces do work together relative to making up the system of quality control. And when you think about that, I think a lot of people sort of try to equate this to ICFR and financial reporting. And while there are many similarities, and there's a lot one can learn in making that analogy, as you think about the components, only some of which I just described, it's very complicated in terms of how these systems interrelate to one another and how they achieve the objectives, the overarching objectives, all of which go to ultimately to quality, but also consider other cost-benefit considerations and business objectives that go even beyond the overarching objective relative to audit quality. So, for example, we want our teams to fully leverage and use technology that's available. We want them to be effective, and being effective includes being, efficient at the same time and proactive. We want them to resolve issues timely and get in front of issues with clients. And so, as you think about that, it's really intended to be proactive, preventative, and looking to stay ahead. So that gives you maybe just a sense. It's a lot broader than I think many people think about. And when you start layering on business objectives on top of it and think about all the interrelationships, these are complex systems of control.
Great, thanks, Brian. And maybe Richard, I'll jump to you. Megan talked earlier about the PCAOB concept release. It generated 36 comment letters. Could you share a little bit about some of the view that EY expressed in their comment letters and things that this audience should understand around, maybe where the profession is landing on some of the items that are in the concept release?
Yeah, sure. So in our comment letter response, we were generally supportive of the PCAOB's concept release, particularly around the risk-based, principles-based approach to that. We think that will drive the right kind of behaviors in terms of a proactive approach to thinking about, what are the risks, what could go wrong, that causes some of that kind of proactive thinking. So again, very, very supportive of that, supportive of an approach that is harmonized with the global standards because of the need to have consistency, across global networks. And again, there were several aspects of it though that whenever we looked at a variety of commenters on this to just to get an understanding of where different constituencies were coming out, we did note that. Particularly from the investor community, that they were particularly focused on the public reporting and the benefits that could come from that. In our comment letter, we focused on the need for additional communications with audit committees. We thought that was very important to provide for additional communications with audit committees, particularly in the U.S., where their role is to evaluate the auditor, basically hire, retain, and evaluate the auditor. So we felt that was important to add to that. There was also a discussion in the exposure draft around whether auditors should establish, or should the standard establish, defined or quantifiable performance measures. And so I mentioned a little bit earlier that in our quality report that we had identified some 57 measures, 11 of which were new just in this current year. And so on that was one where, while we believe that quantifiable measures are important, we were concerned that a standard that specified those measures, could, lead to a stifling of innovation that we think is very important at this point. And, we thought that the standard on that front, should allow firms to continue to evaluate what are the most important measures that they believe is relevant for their practice, rather than specifying those measures in a standard. So, those were some of the, I think, key comments, key takeaways from the comment letter process and how that stacked up against some of our observations.
Anything else from the panel on anything else you saw either from your own firm or as a profession that you wanted to add on to Richard's comments around the views of the concept release?
Lara, I might just, I certainly won't repeat anything that was just said, and certainly our comment letter was very consistent with that, but I would just maybe add there were a lot of questions in that it was a concept release, and it obviously was not yet at a proposal stage. and obviously a lot of great questions relative to what the PCAOB is exploring. I'd maybe just add, like another example was there was a fair amount relative to, how one thinks about governance and supervisory responsibilities. And as you think about that, we and I know other firms have similar structures where we do have independent directors on our board. We have 3. We also recently established an independent advisory committee, and different firms have different structures in receiving outside advice, which personally I know I find very helpful and others within my firm find very helpful. But the idea of sort of dictating how that's done, I think can be very complicated and actually have unintended consequences. So notwithstanding the fact that we're doing a lot of that, and I think others are as well, I think there's a degree of caution that's appropriate relative to dictating how that's done and thinking about the nature of the firm, the size of the firm, the culture of the firm, and how best for them to achieve the kinds of results that are intended by receiving outside advice. And similarly, I just wanted to highlight maybe on supervisory responsibilities, which is something the PCAOB has explored over the years and it previously sort of delayed further consideration until the time of reconsidering the quality control standards. I think, again, we support there being clarity relative to supervisory responsibilities and the like on the one hand. On the other hand, I think as we look at our own organization, I know many firms probably think about it similarly, it's not linear or top-down necessarily. There's a collaborative culture that's important relative to using firm specialists and others throughout the firm and bringing the right resources to bear relative to any particular engagement or issue. And so I think, again, that's another area where degrees of caution are appropriate, not to become overly prescriptive or too linear. And the more you sort of engage with others outside of your own firm, if you will, just relative to the nature of the questions that were raised, one begins to appreciate why one size fits all is a real challenge. And then the last thing I would just mention is I do think this will be a complicated standard for the PCAOB to write. As you look at what the IAASB is doing, they do have a lot of application material. The PCAOB tends not to have application material in their standards in the way they've drafted them to date, and how one gets the desired outcome relative to advancing from where we are under today's existing standards, but yet doesn't include that type of material. I think might be a degree. There might be a degree of challenge relative to thinking through that and making the kinds of changes that are intended. So I think this is a challenging standard to write.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and Lara, I might just add, I think, to the one point Brian made about level of prescription, I think that really impacts the ability of the standard to be scalable. The more prescription, the harder it is to apply to all firms, subject to the QC standards. And so I that would be my biggest takeaway from it. And I do think the IAASB model is comprehensive. And so I think there's some merit to letting firms embrace the IAASB model. And then to the extent there's maybe some additional increments or enhancements that could be made, that could be an opportunity for the PCAOB to layer on at that point. Okay,
great. Thank you, Jim. Megan, we didn't hear from you, but I don't know. They apparently made it clear they don't want to be told what to do.
Yeah, I would say the messages, those messages are loud and clear in the comment letters, and thanks, Brian. We do have our work cut out for us. So this is definitely a complex topic, complex. It's been very complex for the IAASB to deal with. But yeah, so thank you for reiterating all of those points. I think those are great, great points, great highlights from all the various different input.
Thanks, Megan. And for the audience, you can see the passion of all the participants here on this particular topic. But I'll move on. And maybe, Brian, I'll bring this one back to you around monitoring the quality of the audits they perform. What do you think is going to change as a result of the new standards?
Yeah, honestly, Lara, on that point, I guess I would say I don't think anyone's waiting for the new standards. Jim kind of touched on it already. And over time, there's obviously been a great degree of shift and focus on pre-issuance type activities, in addition to the work that's done by firms relative to monitoring on a post-issuance basis. So use of advanced analytics and technology, I think, provides continued opportunity as does being involved from a pre-issuance perspective in getting it right and monitoring to be sure we've gotten it right, and reinforcing where there might be concerns or questions as to whether there's something more that should be done on a pre-issuance basis over time is something that's already been developing for some number of years. And I think that trend is likely to continue, again, given the ability to use technology and data in different ways. And so I think that's something that the standard, it's the direction, we're traveling in the direction of the standard to begin with. I don't think anyone's waiting for the standard on that front, but certainly the standard, I'm sure, would continue to promote that type of thinking. But back to the point of not being too prescriptive, all kidding aside, again, as you think about that balance over time shifting, presumably if you do incremental monitoring before the reports are issued, you may need less post-issuance monitoring. And so you don't want to be too prescriptive about what the requirements are for either while that shift is happening, because the pace of change relative to the way firms are conducting monitoring and the ability to monitor in new ways is pretty dramatic now as compared to perhaps, if you look at over the last few years versus perhaps the decade before it. And that's at a pretty quick clip as compared to the pace of what standard setting might be. So I do think it's another area for a degree of caution for standards not to be too prescriptive and get in the way or impede what would otherwise be good practices that are continuing to develop and emerge.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, clearly all of the panelists have talked today about technology and on the professional side, the importance to their practitioners using technology. And I think what we're hearing from all of you is if we can get consistency across the profession around technologies being deployed and leveraged, it really can accelerate the monitoring that the firms could do and really change like our clients who are using technology to run their businesses. So really, I think an important theme, again, for the audience is you probably see the technology in the execution of an audit. This group is talking about the power in really to run the profession. So maybe with that, Jim, we'll pass it over to you. Over the years, firms have become more focused on identifying and remediating root causes of any quality deficiencies. Do you feel like you have a regimented process for analyzing the root causes, or should some broad guidance be prepared so that everyone gets on the same page around how we analyze root causes? And again, will this change will your process change or the potential standards? So any thoughts around that, Jim?
Yeah, sure. And clearly the root cause analysis is something that's been in evolution for a number of years now. And I would say the robustness of that process has clearly increased. And I think it's really important to understand that an effective root cause analysis will likely take some time to do, right, as a firm, as the initial cause is something that's almost always never the root cause. And I guess I should be careful with never, is likely not the root cause, by way of example. And I think it's just helpful to share an example with the audience. So, a deficiency occurs. And so you might ask the engagement partner, what happened? How come you didn't catch this? And they might respond that, well, I missed it in my review. And so the conclusion might be, well, the root cause is likely not, you don't have enough, you have an ineffective review process. And, I would, challenge that and say, no, because what we have found is normally there's multiple causes contributing to a given deficiency, including, well, why didn't the auditor preparing the work paper get it right to begin with? Why was the review process ineffective? Did the person not have enough time to complete his or her review? And why didn't they have enough time? And so on. And so it's kind of like peeling an onion back, one layer at a time. You keep asking the questions. Well, why, and until you can drive at effective, what I call root causes, so that you can then effectively remediate them. So, from my perspective, it's the process have clearly evolved over time. They are much better today than they were, say, 5 years ago, and clearly, much better than 10 years ago. That said, to your question, I do think there would be benefit to standard speaking to root cause analysis. In terms of our own firm, I'd like to say I don't think we're going to have any changes, But I think maybe to Brian's point, it's a comprehensive standard. There's a lot here, and so I do think there'll be some changes. Clearly, from a documentation perspective, as I look at the design aspect, and then from beginning to end of the root cause process, I think we've got a good process, but it's clearly not documented that covers all aspects of it that I would say maybe are articulated in the proposed ISQ M1.
Richard, anything else from a professional perspective that you want to add around monitoring and what your firm is doing, or your thoughts around, the other side of the standard, whatever it ultimately looks like getting released? Any other additional thoughts?
Yeah, no, the thing that we were pleased to see is how the focus that the standard brings on what I'll call this continuous feedback loop of monitoring and remediation. And so that's something that, again, in practice has been said a couple of times, has evolved over time, but is reaching a level of maturity at some firms. And so I think that the focus of this standard, though, on that process to bring that bring that clinical analysis, if you will, to kind of what was the root cause. Step back from kind of what can be some of the emotional aspects of whenever you find a deficiency on an engagement or something like that, and do that clinical analysis to say, okay, what was the root cause, and then feed that into kind of the continuous monitoring remediation loop. And it's that creates the continuous improvement that I think is going to be an important aspect of this standard and its implementation, and certainly one that we're focused on.
Great, thank you. Megan, maybe we'll close out this section around monitoring and remediation, just to say, from your perspective, what other improvements would you expect to see? I asked them all what they expect is going to happen, so what would you expect to see? And I intentionally put you after, so sorry, guys.
No, and I will say they all passed with flying colors, because I think I agreed with all of the things that they highlighted. I think the two big things I would say were really the focus on the what went wrong, why it went wrong, that whole root cause analysis, and then I think the points that Richard made around the kind of the feedback loop. So I do think that the approach that the IAASB is taking and that's under consideration by the PCAOB obviously has a very significant focus on this aspect of the standard, because this is really where things have evolved dramatically since the old standards, which were all written kind of before even external regulation was a thing. So, obviously there's a lot that's influenced the way in which all of this stuff has evolved. And, I really do think that this thing is this whole monitoring and remediation process is kind of at the heart of a proactive and risk-based quality management system. So it really those requirements to monitor, to evaluate, to take a step back, figure out what went wrong, and then take action to deal with the findings and figure out what to do. So I think the recognition that deficiencies, may require action at an engagement level, but there's like the next level down is, okay, so something went wrong at the engagement level, but why did that go wrong? Was it because people weren't trained right? You didn't have the right people? Maybe there was something wrong with the technology or the methodology tool or template or whatever it was that people were using, or maybe there's a need for a consultation requirement, or maybe a specialist should be involved, which are really all things that start to point to, what should the system have in place to really support engagements. And obviously it should all be a function of the risk and kind of the risk of things going wrong. And I think my fellow panelists have made some really good remarks around the whole root cause analysis. And to me, that process of really taking a step back, thinking about, what went wrong? What were the, thinking, did you miss something? Did you miss a risk? When you were thinking about your quality objectives and thinking about what were the risks to the achievement of those objectives, did you miss something? Or is something that you thought kind of wasn't a big deal actually turned out to be a big deal? and then looking at the responses and the controls that you had in place, did they get put in place the way that you designed them? Did they operate the way you intended? And then I think there's this aspect of things continue to evolve and change. So I think we've heard a lot through the remarks about how the environment changes, and in particular, I think some great remarks around how technology can be used in more innovative ways. I think then that drives the need to continually think about, what really more can be done and what is the most effective way to put something in place to support the performance of engagements. I think one point I would make is that I do also think that root cause analysis provides an opportunity for a firm to kind of compare and contrast. So look at the good versus the bad. So when something goes wrong, so you have a bad inspection or you have some other kind of quality event, obviously you dig in and you try to figure out what went wrong in this circumstance. And I think Jim described that really well. But I think it's also an opportunity to think about, okay, well, all these other engagements, we didn't have findings on them, or, the other thing didn't happen. And, sometimes you will learn some things from that as well. And I think certainly certainly for sure, the larger firms are already doing that. But I think that's an important element of a root cause analysis. And then I think the comments around the shift to not just being a focus on inspection of completed engagements, but this more continual process and really a focus of in-process engagements is really a very powerful aspect of the things that everyone is talking about. So, things like the in-flight reviews, the coaching programs, the inspections of incomplete engagements, those really provide you the opportunity to kind of get ahead of the problems before it's too late. So I think that's an area where clearly I think we've already heard people are making a lot of investment. And I think it does give you the ability to tailor what comes on the back end, so I think you can kind of think about what were the results of some of that in-flight or interim monitoring, and that, those are good inputs into then how you design your after the fact kind of activities. And then obviously a big input into the monitoring and remediation processes would also be the results of external inspection, which could be PCAOB or peer review or, some other kind of a regulatory inspection. So, I think this is an area where, there's a lot happening. And, I think this is really one of the significant drivers and something that will be a really significant benefit of the new standards and the new approach.
Great. Thank you, Megan. We got one or two questions in from the audience. I want to take those and then we'll close out with a timely topic. But maybe for Richard, I'll take this to you. So what's the role of the U.S. firm in quality control over their international affiliates? For example, if you're relying on an international member firm for a component audit who conducts internal inspections of work related to U.S. issuers in that jurisdiction.
Yeah, great question there. And actually, I will maybe leverage off some of the discussion in yesterday's panel, where the panel talked about group audits there. And so, there's kind of a couple of ways to think about this. One is where you have a U.S. headquartered audit, where the U.S. firm is called at the group team or the primary team, and you have a component team in an international jurisdiction. Or the other could be where you have a foreign company that is listed here in the U.S. And so I guess firms' quality control approaches around those are a little bit different. So the question here is, whenever it seems like it's focused on an audit of a U.S. company with international operations. So I would think about that both from the firm level as well as the engagement level. So at the firm level, again, we're going to be thinking about the quality controls that exist, kind of at the firm level. So you think about standardized methodologies, standardized tools, standardized monitoring processes that enables the primary team or the U.S. team to be able to have good understanding, good visibility, and then good monitoring on what is transpiring at the international affiliate, coupled with then the supervision and review that would take place of that engagement. And so again, it's these top level controls around the common tools, common processes, common systems and common methodology really start to play into that type of engagement. And then the second, I'd mentioned was the engagement level controls. And much of that was covered in yesterday's panel around, what takes place where, the primary team would inspect work papers and perhaps site visits. Those types of things is, coupled together with the firm level controls is how I would think about it.
Great. That's excellent, Richard. So I'm going to say I'm really proud of us. We've gone almost over an hour here, and I'm going to say COVID-19 for the first time on today's panel. It is a very timely topic, and it really does get to the heart of a system of quality control and how, just like our clients, how do we navigate what, I'll say, for the profession and the PCAOB has become an overnight remote environment from a firm perspective. All of the firms started working remotely in early March and started completing year-end audits, quarterly reviews, and now 2020 audits in an environment that's essentially fully remote, with our clients in many, many cases also remote, changing controls and dealing with a pretty significant downturn. And Megan, in the case of the PCAOB, trying to continue to fulfill its fiduciary responsibility around monitoring the profession during the time. So maybe in our last 9 minutes or so here, I want to make sure I hear from all of you. Share with me what's changed. Did the system of quality control help us? Did we need to change it like our clients? Maybe start with the profession. How are the firms reacting and really navigating in this very challenging environment? And I'll start with you, Richard, just because you're on screen already.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, so perhaps the most visible aspect of quality controls are the inspections. We've spoken here of a couple of times both PCAOB inspections as well as the internal inspections that firms do of themselves. And about kind of mid-March, when everybody converted to a work from home environment, getting all of those inspections converted to a virtual model. We were certainly very pleased to work with the PCAOB. There was a little bit of a pause there on inspections to help everybody get re-geared to doing inspections in a virtual environment, allow the accounting firms to focus on Q1 reviews of public companies during that time. But then, by middle of May, the entire inspection regime, both PCAOB inspections as well as internal inspections at our firm, certainly we had converted to virtual inspections. So those are now going on as would be expected. But so much more. You think about learning and the importance of the training that we do for our people on the routine performance of audits. Converting all of that to a virtual environment, the monitoring that goes behind that to make sure that people are taking the courses, the day-to-day monitoring of the engagements. Again, so much of that had been already converted to a technology-based monitoring tools that frankly we didn't really change a whole lot of what we were doing, just change where we were doing it from on monitoring engagement leverage, executive involvement, the pacing of engagements throughout the year, et cetera, that we've continued to be able to do in a remote environment. So those are just some of the key points I'd highlight. Okay, great. Brian, anything else from your perspective?
Yeah, I would echo what's been said. Obviously, again, and then say a few more things incrementally. Clearly, the pivoting initially and immediately to being able to perform procedures, both interim review and audit procedures virtually was critical. And I think as a profession, we've all done very well at that in working with our clients and making sure that we're able to continue forward and support the effort from a financial reporting and audit perspective. When you think about the effort that we and others have undergone, though, in terms of just the training and the publications and the rethinking relative to practices, it's been enormous in terms of the volume of that. I think alone, we've put out like 170 publications, podcasts, webcasts, videos in total a lot of them having to do with COVID and COVID-related issues. And you know, our partners and staff have gone through an enormous amount of incremental sort of training and webcasts, and then you know, we've been available from a national office perspective for increased volumes of consultations. Teams are obviously dealing with a lot of difficult issues that our clients are dealing with, whether it be going concern assessments, whether it be impairment considerations, whether it be changes to companies' internal controls, whether it be figuring out how to do virtual physical inventory observations, and making sure that those are effective. There's been a lot of change, and there's been a lot to adapt to. But to the point, Lara, that you was implicit in, actually explicit in what you asked, I do think you know, our existing system of quality controls served us very well relative to being able to support that change. When you think about scanning and monitoring the change in the practice environment, what we do relative to then responding to that. This wasn't wholesale change to the design of our system of quality controls. This was actually just operating our system as designed. Obviously, what was flowing through it in terms of the nature and volume of activity was significantly different, resulting in us doing different things as a result in some cases. But we were and continue to operate our system of quality controls, which has served us very well in this environment for us to be able to be responsive to the change that we're dealing with, and will continue to respond to. So a lot going on, a lot to do, a lot of change. But I think the profession has responded really well, and companies alike relative to them being able to continue to provide useful and reliable financial reporting information for investors.
Great, thank you. Jim, quickly, anything incremental? Not to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, really. I mean, between Richard and Brian's comments, I would say, you know, clearly the profession, I think, really did stand ready and was in a position to work in a virtual setting. You know, the one maybe incremental thing I would just point out is, you know, we've worked on a virtual setting for a number of years now, and where, you know, we might have saw, you know, an area where people might have asked a question is in our internal inspections, where we would tend to bring internal inspection teams into an office location, right? And it was for a couple of reasons: a little bit of social interaction, getting some of that group think together, but then the engagements they would inspect were from a variety of offices. And so clearly, you know, we learned, well, you don't need to pull all these people in because they're not looking at, you know, a given office. And so we were concerned about, well, are we going to miss out on that social interaction, that group thinking, et cetera? And what we found is, and especially the younger folks, you know, probably not someone like myself, but the younger folks, I mean, they've been able to gravitate to the virtual setting very easily between Zoom meetings and GoToMeetings, Microsoft Teams, you name it. The technology has been there to help support this type of environment. And yes, there's individual situations that are challenging. Brian mentioned some of them, but you know, on the whole, I think we've done very well as a profession.
Okay, great. Megan, anything from a regulator perspective as you think about what's happened since March to now, and likely for a ways forward?
I mean, I think what I would say is that I think, you know, obviously things have been enormously challenging, and I think they will continue to be enormously challenging because it doesn't look like this is ending anytime soon. So, you know, I think as the folks have mentioned, you know, the PCAOB provided a 45-day relief period right at the beginning to kind of take a break from actually in-person inspections. You know, some of the firms availed themselves of that, others to some degrees, but we used that time at the PCAOB to really kind of get ourselves ready for when that expired, and then to really hit the ground running. And I think we've had our own challenges, obviously, in taking our whole organization to a remote working environment. But then, you know, we've tried to look at ways to use technology to facilitate the performance of inspections, and, you know, really trying to be nimble in terms of how we go about our work. You know, so obviously in this year, you know, we're going to be learning as we go, and looking at observing and learning how the challenges of the current environment are manifesting in the audit, and how firms are responding. You know, so there's a lot of engagement with the firms, in particular the larger firms for now. And then as we pick up the actual engagements, I think we'll be looking at that kind of what's happening at that engagement level. We're also looking at the most effective use of our target team in this current environment. And then really, I think as you probably are aware, in 2019, we increased the focus on the QC systems of the largest 6 US firms. So we certainly continue to plan to continue that in 2020, which I think, from listening to everybody's remarks, that's really at the heart of how to be nimble, how to respond, and, at the end of the day, not take your eye off the ball, which is the performance of quality engagements or engagements that comply with the standards, and, really protect the investors from that perspective, who probably more than ever are looking for credibility in the financial reporting. So, we're standing there to try to learn, and then also to step in where we think we might need to provide some guidance. We issued a document early in the process, but we're certainly continuing to listen and hear about what are the challenges, and happy to engage and listen to questions that folks may have.
All right, thank you, Megan. I can tell you we're all appreciative of the PCAOB's, I'll just say, stature the last several years around trying to get ahead of things with us. For the audience, system of quality control really is your culture coming to life. If you think about COVID, for all of us, it's really about our people feeling supported, knowing that their purpose is to deliver high quality audits, and that it is end period. And really the system of quality control is really all of that coming to life every single day. And it's a big lift for all of us. Hopefully you got out of that today some of the stickier points. I really want to thank our panelists, Brian, Richard, Jim, and Megan, for joining us.